Has social justice gone too far? This is a claim you'll hear, usually from the cuck types, sometimes from the more reasonable and self-aware liberals, or the ones who are more concerned about the impending right-wing backlash. They'll say, well, feminism had some reasonable demands at first, but they just went too far. After they achieved their legitimate objectives, they couldn't stop. The organizations and the activists couldn't stop there. They needed something else to agitate for. Or, the civil rights movement had legitimate aims at first, but maybe they've gone a little too far. Or maybe they're going a little too far. Or, stuff in this vein. So, has social justice gone too far? And the answer is no. It hasn't gone too far because it was wrong from the get-go. And by wrong, I mean parasitic, dishonest, destructive, based on lies, etc., so on and so forth. There were two threads in the early civil rights movement. You had the Booker T. Washington thread, where he wanted to promote gradual self-improvement, education, industry, etc., so on and so forth. And you had the W.E.B. Du Bois thread, which was literally aligned with communism, with red communism, funded by the Soviet Union, which wanted to demand equal rights and to agitate and to revolt to obtain equal rights. And ultimately the W.E.B. Du Bois thread won out. And what's the result? Since the triumph of that brand of civil rights in the 1960s and the enfranchisement of millions of black voters and the creation of the Great Society, welfare programs, and everything else, affirmative action, anti-discrimination laws, what's been the result of that? We've been subsidizing the reproduction of their most unequal for 2 generations, and the result has been the absolute destruction of the black family, whereas 80% of black children used to be born within wedlock. Now 70% are born out of wedlock to single mothers dependent on welfare. So we've subsidized the Aboriginal female reproductive strategy of promiscuity plus seeking support from the tribe. Something which doesn't even really exist in Africa anymore. Like, they've moved past that, but we've brought it back here. And the dysgenic effects are just terrible. I mean, these children from these welfare queens, they're not going to advance the standing of their race. They're not going to achieve progress for their race. They're going to do the opposite, because they're coming from the lowest strata even of that race, and disproportionately so. Whereas, under the old way of imposing white family norms and white reproductive strategies, the nuclear family, etc., those are the norms and reproductive strategies that made white people white. And so, it seems reasonable to assume that given enough time, they would have a similar effect on other peoples. And that seems to have been the case. There was a slow but gradual improvement all throughout the slavery era and the segregation era. Booker T. Washington wanted to build on that improvement. And it was going to be slow, it was going to be gradual. But if you do that, if you build on that improvement, if you cultivate education and industry and various other civilized virtues, then you make it more and more costly for people not to associate with you, because they're missing out on benefits and opportunities by not associating with you. And, it's the old libertarian argument that racism can't survive in a free market because it's not rational. Well, that's not true. It's plenty rational in a lot of cases to use statistical kind of aggregate criteria for decision making, because quite often, it's just not profitable to look at individual criteria. It costs more to sort the good individuals from the bad than the benefit that you gain from the good, minus the harm from the bad that still slipped through. So it's just better to categorically exclude in a lot of cases. So, but following this Booker T. Washington strategy of cultivating, civilized virtues and being able to offer benefits to interact and to exchange and to associate, that's going to make it more costly to discriminate categorically. And so it's going to make it more beneficial for people to treat you as an individual and to associate with you if it's profitable to associate with you. And so that's a strategy that could have worked long term. And it would have been slow. It wouldn't have been fast. But it would have had a beneficial effect. And not just a beneficial effect, but a mutually beneficial effect. Right? It would have been a win-win. But on the other hand, the communist strategy, the W.E.B. Du Bois strategy, was just to demand, to presuppose equality and to demand the trappings of equality. Well, if equality is not a fact, then that's a lie, first of all. And lies are parasitic. And if you're demanding the trappings of equality, and then every subsequent sign of inequality or inequality of outcomes is treated as, prima facie evidence of oppression or discrimination, that's the only plausible explanation if equality is assumed, then you end up with a never-ending campaign. And if, these methods, these shaming tactics, this activism, agitation, rioting, whatever else you get into, if that worked in one case to obtain certain benefits and privileges and everything else, then, why not use it again to obtain others? So if you're not paying for the benefits, if you're not earning the benefits that you're demanding and that you're receiving, there's no incentive to stop using those methods to demand and to receive still more benefits that you are not earning, that you are not paying for through exchange, that you're not offering anything in return for. So that's why this civil rights campaign has never ended, because of those methods that were adopted and because of the lies that were adopted, the assumption of equality from the get-go. And, the same with feminism. That's why they've never quit. They never stopped at suffrage. They never stopped at, equal hiring consideration or anything like that. They've always demanded more and more and more and more and more. And why not? The means that they've chosen to employ: feminine coercion, rallying, shaming, gossip, nagging, scolding. Those means have sufficed in the past to win them what they want. And so they're going to make more and more demands and use those demands to try and secure what they want. Whereas if they had started from, the position that, hey, we kind of want the vote and we're willing to pay for it somehow. I don't know how right off the top of my head. Maybe that might have been a productive compromise. Or, something like, marital rape. Maybe it's really, really important that a woman not have to have sex when she doesn't want to, even in marriage. Maybe that's really, really important. Like, there's no way for me to know. I'm not a woman. So, to me, it doesn't sound like that big a deal in that context, but, I could be wrong. What do I know? It's a subjective evaluation ultimately. And so, I have no way of knowing how strongly that evaluation is held. But if they really do hold that evaluation strongly, then they could offer something in return. And in that case, there's a fairly straightforward exchange that you could propose, and that is to offer men the right to withhold money within marriage. An unlimited right to withhold money whenever and however they want, just like women have the right supposedly to withhold sex whenever and however they want. So, that'd be a fairly straightforward exchange that you could offer to authenticate the value to you of what you're demanding and to pay for it, to compensate for it. I don't know if women actually would have wanted the right to vote enough to propose any kind of such exchange, or if they actually would have wanted the right not to have sex with their husbands enough to actually propose such an exchange, but that would be one way of going about it. And the thing is, when you are proposing a productive exchange of value for value, something that is worth more, so each party is getting something that's worth more to them than what they're giving up. When you have to pay for what you demand, then you have to evaluate whether it's actually worth it to you, what it costs, what you have to give up in order to get it. When you are employing these kind of Marxist agitation tactics, these kind of feminine coercion tactics that feminists use and other Marxists use, social justice warriors and civil rights activists, you don't have to make that calculation. And so you can demand outrageous things that aren't even worth what they cost to you. But you're not bearing the costs. You're trying to impose those costs on somebody else by raising the cost of disagreement or raising the cost of not complying in a variety of unrelated ways. And so you're not having to perform that calculus. You don't even have the ability to self-correct when you're going too far, when you're demanding too much, when you're making unreasonable demands. If you employ productive methods instead, negotiation and exchange, or even combat, war is even more, because there is a risk and a cost involved in going to war, right? You're putting your life on the line. You're putting your skin in the game, so to speak. So that's even a more honest method of going about it than these kind of effeminate strategies. But that's why social justice hasn't gone too far, because there was never not too far. It was too far from the beginning. So that strategy, that way of going about things was always parasitic. It was always dishonest. It was always destructive. And it was always bound to lead where we are today. And so we're going to have to draw a line in the sand eventually and put a stop to it. And we should have drawn a line in the sand. Our grandfathers and great-grandfathers should have drawn that line generations ago, but they didn't. So here we are. Now we have to draw it. There's no question about it. Nobody can deny that we have to draw it. Should have been done back then. Anyway, that's neither here nor now. It didn't happen. Now it has to.